schools. And so typically Madison Park has been the school that has been the one that has given the certification type of high level career pathway work, but we're planning on career pathway work in all of those at least 7 comprehensive high schools that we will be working with. So that's the opportunity there to be able to really look at the articulation with our local community colleges, as well as the apprenticeship opportunities with our local unions as well.
So East Boston is one of the 7 schools?
Yes.
As part of the redesign?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I know that you've been working, I would say actually for at least the first time in my district, but it was certainly a well-received partnership with the BPDA in Charlestown. I think, and specifically talking about Plan Charlestown, BPS had representatives for the first time at a master plan hearing or event where they were discussing, above all other things, the other major housing development, which I'm blessed to have both in my district, the new neighborhood of Suffolk Downs and then the revamping of the housing development at Bunker Hill. And so that's going to double, maybe triple in size in terms of the population, not so much the units. And having BPS there is vital, as the majority of those kids, I think, will be going across the street to the Harvard Kent and to other Charlestown schools, of course, if not throughout all of the district. So I'm curious as to how you are planning, or what standards you're starting to use in conversations look like when you're dealing with planning neighborhoods and planning schools. This is directly linked, I feel, to what Superintendent Casilius had mentioned before with segregation patterns and gentrification, forcing many of our schools to resegregate on income, on race. And so it's wonderful to think that BPS could be looking at these trends and building accordingly and making sure that they're ready for what's happening, in the city of Boston. So I don't know if you want to talk about that. And I'm very excited, honestly, I'm very, very excited about the Core 4 and the 7 and East Boston High School. I think that's been one of the top asks for tech ed and union relationships. So this is very exciting. We're talking, just for folks, 14,000 union jobs at just Suffolk Downs alone for the next 10 to 15 years. So it's great that we get those pipelines. But go ahead.
Yeah, it'll be really nice to have your partnership in that too, Counselor, and all the counselors, in terms of identifying where those career pathways are and where we can get some quick wins for your particular communities and regions. That's really, really important. Part of authentic engagement is being able to be part of these roundtables. And so our team's going to be looking so be sure that we're invited to these tables, and we'll be sure to show up. I was just at Mattapan right before the COVID outbreak and talking and discussing with them, with their group too. So I think it's really important that we're at the table.
And I'm sorry, did someone ask? I see it, but I didn't know if I heard the answer to if we're getting the money from the Student Opportunity Act.
Oh yeah. So I believe we were slotted for $17 million cut from the state this year, and then we were able to get about, I think, $7 million of that, and so there's just about a $10 million cut, if I'm correct in my numbers, Nate, in terms of Student Opportunity Act, and the charter, and then most of that, I think, is charter reimbursements, but I want to be corrected by the experts there with the numbers. David or Nate?
Nailed it. Yeah, I think one of the things that we benefit from is really a close partnership with the city budget office. And so a lot of the questions and evaluating the impact of COVID on both state and federal funding is something that we're rapidly evaluating. And I would defer most of those questions around potential impact on state funding to our partners in OBM.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. So we have a few councillors who are still here in the hearing who I wanted to give a chance to have just a second round of questions if the superintendent and team, but I was thinking to just have, if people can just raise one or two, like a burning question you have, because I think this has been a long day so far, and we have many more hearings to go, and I am glad, as Nate referenced, that we were able to sort of arrange those according to the strategic plan. So we'll be getting together for a number of Tuesdays to come. But I did just want to give my colleagues who have stayed on the chance to circle back if there's something burning. So I'm going to go in the order again of who's on.
I do, Chairwoman Bach, want to just say I will be available too for counselors if they do want have questions. They can either submit them in writing to me, or they can, I'm willing to Zoom with anybody to answer any other questions as well, so that we don't go too late for everybody.
Great, wonderful. Yeah, and I also want to add that, and I think counselors know this, but just for the viewing public, today we've been doing a round robin of questions, just sort of on all kinds of different topics. As we zero in on some of these subtopics in the coming hearings, we're actually going to have council working sessions ahead of time to help collect up some questions for BPS and send those over to you all in advance. And my hope on that front is that by doing that, we'll also be able to have a conversation that's a little bit more like topical and organized, so that if a few counselors have related questions on something, we can sort of talk about that at once instead of just bouncing all over the place. I think it's important to have an overview like this, but we're going to want that opportunity to really dig in going forward. So I just wanted to, in turn, sort of just recognize the counselors who are still here and just see if anybody has any final questions before we wrap up the hearing. So Councilor Asabi George first.
Thank you, Chair Bach, and thank you everyone for hanging in all this time. I wonder if there is a list, and I can get this afterwards, but a list of schools with declining budgets, and I think it's probably in the budget books, but I am curious about the impact at each of those schools, what decisions were made, and what the losses will be to each of those school communities. And then second, this I think came up as I was tuned in more clearly sometimes, and other times maybe not as much. But thinking about our response as a city, and in particular as a school district, to this current crisis with COVID-19, is there a group that's in place, not just thinking about the future planning or re-engaging in school? I know that that's happening. I'm curious about the planning that's in place and the documenting to plan should this happen again, so that we are on point with the technology, so that teachers and other school staff have their roles and responsibilities clearly articulated ahead of time. So I think that that's happening to some degree. I can have a response now or a response later. Certainly on the first part, I'm happy with the response later. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody.
Yes, so we're documenting all of that, Counselor, and keeping track of it, as well as within this budget's investments, we have a number of investments around remote learning, any of the agreements that we have, labor agreements, those other things, we're all accounting for best practices, sharing the best practices, our website for learning continuity, support services, all of that is being documented.
Great, thank you. Councilor Mejia?
Thank you again. I feel like we've gotten to know each other all day today. I do appreciate having an opportunity to learn more about the budget and the process and all the work that you guys have put into it. It's greatly appreciated. I am just curious about, I hear from a lot of schools that that some of the recommendations that come from central office, oftentimes it's time to implement on a local level with the school. There just seems to be a disconnect between what central office is advocating for and what the principal and the leadership in that school actually ends up implementing. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of accountability, as you start thinking about this budget and the way the money is being trickled into these schools, what are going to be your measurement tools, and how are you going to hold these schools accountable to ensuring that they're delivering on that promise and utilizing the dollars as you all have earmarked?
So our Chief of Accountability is Corey Harris, and he's going to be over these 33 transformation schools. He's working with the transformational leaders in coordination with our superintendents, and we will be driving it from that way. There has always been this tension between school leaders and their autonomy in decision making, but we did not give them the opportunity for autonomy with these investments in the 33 transformation schools because of my authority as superintendent to improve these schools. And so we are going to have expectations for each of these positions, and then there's going to be professional development that's going to be set aside, and you'll see that in the budget for these teams that we're installing in these schools. And that's how we're going to be holding them accountable to the progress that they're making. There will be interim assessments, ongoing data dashboards that we will be using as we look at their continued progress, and not wait until the end of the year, but continually iterate over the year as we implement this improvement process.
There was a lot of talk about the transformation schools, but I'm hoping that at some point we're also going to be talking about the schools that are not under that portfolio and making sure that they're getting the supports that they need. Because what I often see is when we focus all of our energy on one set of schools, then we lose sight on the others. And so I'm hoping that maybe in another budget discussion we can talk about what those support systems are going to look like for those schools which will fall within that portfolio.
Well, all schools will have the opportunity to participate in some of this professional development that we're doing. We call it Tier 1 instruction, Tier 1 supports. And so